60,000 today. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online. Standard rates apply.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
In 2009, I went to a community gathering, and this community gathering is where the king of our tribe normally addresses the masses. Before the king began speaking, he asked a rhetorical question, but I didn't take it as such. So I ran to the stage and I told him, I know the answer. And then he obviously lowered the mic for me, and I gave him the response. It was followed by something that I never thought possible. He said, if there was one thing I could do for you, what would you want? Many things ran in my mind. On that day, it was really hot, so I wanted ice cream. But I thought, it's weird. Who asked the king to buy him ice cream? So I asked for something better. I said, can you please take me to a school where I can learn how to read and write in English? Note that by the time I was making this request, I was in grade 4. And I was fitting a statistic that says that 78% of South African grade 4 students cannot read for meaning. This statistic happens to be concentrated in structurally impoverished black communities as well as schools. But nonetheless, I made the request. Time went by. I thought, but I asked for a scholarship. Are you going to take me to school or not? 2 years later, I then received a call from the king's office. They said, hey, young man, we are starting this scholarship venture to take 2 boys from across the 29 Bafokeng villages to a school down in Cape Town. Do you want to be a part of it? I said, yes. And then I remember we went back and forth doing interviews and so forth. The time came when one day I was coming back from school and I saw a car parked outside my house. So we don't have a car at home. So I was wondering, whose car is this? And when I got inside the house, there was a box that said, you have been awarded a full scholarship as well as an offer of admission. Please come join us for your grade 8 year. And then I'll start high school the following year. That was intense. I had never been prepared for that type of opportunity to be bestowed upon me. From merely just making a simple thing, asking, can you please do this for me? And also him honoring the promise, because very, very few people honor promises these days. I firmly believe in what Paulo Freire says when he says that it is one's revolutionary duty to study. Regardless of where you are, regardless of who you know, study. Because one thing that people cannot take away from you is what you know and your intellectual capacity to think at a superior level. Because regardless of what skin color you are, regardless of what sex you are, everyone bows down to superior thinking.
Obakeng Liseane, he is the recipient of the Mail and Guardian 200 Young South Africans, or at least one of the recipients. You'd know that the Mail and Guardian honors some of the country's top leaders on a year-to-year basis. Welcome to the Talking Point. It's 11 after 9 o'clock. I'm Cathy Mohlahlana with you until midday. Yes, I know my voice is not quite back yet. It's still sort of proddling along, but hopefully you can bear with me for the next couple of hours as we get through to the show. Coming up on the show, as we always do, we'll kick it off with the open line. I'll be taking your calls, and of course you get to set the agenda. I'll take your calls on 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial, 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, I'll take those WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107. Just a quick look at what you can expect coming up on the show. Of course, yesterday was Heritage Day, public holiday. What did you get up to? I trust that you had a good public holiday. I spent the day out at Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality in Gqeberha and looking at issues of heritage, reflecting on 30 years of South Africa's history, or rather 30 years of South Africa's democracy. And I'm always fascinated by how our conversations about heritage go back to issues of our history as a country, go back to the apartheid government and the kind of social division that was sown in our society, and how it seems we're still grappling with this idea of a national identity, what that identity is, what that needs to look like, especially in a country where we have so many diverse people, languages, tribes that are represented. So it's been one of the things that I'm reflecting on to say, I don't get the sense that we have a national identity that we can all agree on or that we all subscribe to. But what does that mean then for what we're able to build for ourselves going into the future? And of course, one of the I don't want to say it's not a danger, but one of the offshoots of again focusing on heritage and one's personal heritage is that it does cause us to look very much inward. So we can very much become focused on, well, I am Pedi, I am Zulu, I am Umxhosa. And in affirming that, and in wanting to own that, how do we do that while also creating space for the South Africa that we live in, the diversity that we have said we want to embrace as a nation? So what is that national identity, and why is it that we are still grappling so much with what exactly our identity is and what we see as our heritage? The answer is too different when you ask South Africans. We have to get to some point of consensus. That's just my view. But I'm more than happy to take your reflections on it on 086 000 2032 as we get going with the open line. And of course on the WhatsApp voice note line 0614104107. Coming up in the second hour of the show, we'll be focusing on Citizens Corner. And today we're dealing with a very important issue, and it's around social housing. We know that millions of South Africans are struggling with getting access to housing. They cannot afford to get home financing for their houses. Entry-level homes in this country are pitched at around 300,000 Rand, but so many people are unable to unlock the financing needed for this. We then also, of course, have the RDP program, which its mandate was to try and ensure that South Africans have access to housing. But where do we then build, where do we meet the gap or close the gap? Because we're 30 years into democracy, and yet we still have an RDP backlog. The reality is that the state cannot build RDP houses in perpetuity. The other issue is that we don't have enough low-cost housing available, at least close to where people work, that they are able to actually live and make a meaningful life in as far as being active in the economy is concerned. So that's the conversation we'll have in the second hour of the show. And in the final hour, we'll be wrapping the conversation up with the African New Year. The 23rd of September, of course, marks the African New Year, Inzalo Yelanga, and it's said to be the world's oldest stone calendar. We'll be taking a look at that with Mkhulu Nsingiza, who is a historian, and he'll also be teaching us a bit more about the African New Year. So that's what you can expect coming up on the show over the next 3 hours. I'll be taking your calls on the open line, 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial, 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, 0614 104 107.
Mzansi, what has become of our country? Gender-based violence is eating our moral fabric, and we can no longer afford to turn a blind eye. This violence affects us all, occurring in various forms including femicide, which is the intentional killing of a woman because of her gender. It takes place anywhere, anytime, even in our own safe spaces at home. Working together with social partners through the National Strategic Plan on GBVF, the government aims to create a GBVF-free South Africa. As we acknowledge the gains from our 30 years of freedom and democracy, let us also work together to break the cycle of GBVF on our home ground. Call the 24-hour GBVF Command Center number on 0800 428 428 or text *120*7867#. A message from the GCIS.
Get down to Dis-Chem from this Friday 27th to Sunday 29th September for incredible one weekend only 2+1 cheapest free deals on the widest range of sports supplements, energy drinks and bars from brands like Biogen, NPL, USN and many more. Get expert advice from our in-store consultants to help you reach your health and fitness goals. Excludes all advertised products. Only at Dis-Chem. Better health starts here.
Weeknights on S3 are anything but ordinary. BBC Primetime brings you the best of British television from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Open your mind to Life on Death Row, Thursdays at 9 p.m. and Resistance in a Hostile Environment, a 3-part documentary showcasing turning points which would go on to define race relations in the UK for a generation. Thursdays at 10 p.m. Wind down your weeknights with The Outlaws, Fridays at 9 p.m. and explore the world's most dangerous roads at 10 p.m. Channel your best entertainment with BBC Primetime, only on S3. Open up.
S3.
Call us on 086 000 2032.
You're listening to The Talking Point. I'm taking your call 086 000 2032. Yes, thank you for all of the home remedies for my voice. I appreciate it. I can guarantee you I have been doing all of that. The only thing I have not tried is the brandy. Maybe I'll go get myself a bottle of brandy after the show. Garth, you're calling us from East London. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Garth.
Cool, man. I just heard you were talking about this. It was Harry's day yesterday, the holiday, no?
Yes.
Yeah, man. Sakina, I was so surprised. I walked up at the beach branch here in East London, Eastern Beach, and I was just chilling out there, and I had my outfit on, I'm a Khoisan, but guts of blood of Khoisan in me, and I had my whole outfit out there, and I had my wand, walking with my wand as well. And then what happened, came across a couple of people out there, tell me that, they asked me like, are you a Zulu or something like that,
Mm.
Yeah, also call me like, Mr. Bones and all that. I said, no, man. No, guys, you got it wrong here. I'm a Khoisan, Can't you see my outfit? And, they were going on and laughing and saying, no, I'm Mr. Bones.
Oh, no. Garth, Mr. Bones as in Mr. Bones from the movies, the Leon Schuster movies?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. And, and I was so surprised people calling me Saka Zulu and all that. So, I don't know, maybe they all just lost there in the Eastern Cape. But now I've been walking up and down there, and, I've been taking a couple of photos with some of people there, the beachgoers and all that, and there's some of them said, oh, this outfit of yours looks so beautiful and all that, praising me like, the Khoisan. I said, yes, we are the Khoisan around here in the Eastern Cape. But anyhow, that was now yesterday. But what I actually want to talk about is these guys, these puzzle shops out here in the Eastern Cape. It sucks so much with these container guys, ne? Let me tell you something. They got a cashback thing there where you can, draw money from them, 100 rand, whatever. And they will charge you 10 rand on 100 rand, right? But now, I said to the one guy, I think this is very unfair. You're taking 10 rand from from this 100 rand that I'm taking from you, and plus the bank is also charging me. So how does this work? You know, they is any item you buy. For instance, if you buy with your card, you buy maybe a loaf of bread, right? He will charge you the loaf of bread money. He will charge you like 20 rand for a loaf of bread. Buying a newspaper, daily newspaper, that goes like something like 8 rand. They will charge you 12 rand. And I mean, that is not on really. It sucks so much, you know. I say they're making us more poorer, and we are supporting these guys. And then you asking them when you are 50 cents short of your money, they tell you straight away they cannot help you. The boss is not there, you know. But yet you are buying from the same container every day.
And Garth, is it? Do you think that the increased prices are because they obviously have to pay for the transportation costs of getting those products closer to the community?
Yes, no, that is cool. But now when you go with your card, I'm talking about when you go with your bank card, you know, they the moment they see your bank card, they like grab it and they put it into the little machine. Now you buy, and obvious, you standing now outside, and you buying now stuff, and you say, okay, listen, loaf of bread, pint of milk, whatever you're buying. But yeah, now you forget now, maybe you forgot something else to buy, because now the customers at the back here shouting, they tell you, hey, listen, we're raining wet here, and you know, it's very cold here, just buy quickly. And they will give you the stuff, and if now you forgot something, you're making another transaction. And that same transaction is like double again the amount, and plus the bank fees. I think that is so unfair, man. Really. And they also said like they're going to have this save more, or they'll save a lot shops around here, ShopRite and all that. Really, they must have those guys coming in here. And I said to the one guy there, you know, I'm going to explore you guys on the radio, but they don't listen to our radio shows, you know. There's one thing they do. They don't listen to our radio shows.
Yeah, and, look, I guess, Garth, I mean, some of that responsibility also is in your hands as a consumer, right? Because you are the one that decides to use your card and how many times you're going to actually use your card. The bank charges, those are unfortunately not in the hands of the store owners. You know, it's because of the technology that they have to use.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Garth.
No, you're speaking. I just think this is really unfair. These guys, they can never ever help you. Like I said, you ask him and tell him, he tell you, listen here, there's a 50 cent, there's a rent short here. But
yeah, I hear the point that Garth is making. Look, I mean, it comes down to relationships, right? And the kind of relationships that entrepreneurs and even business owners are building with their communities. I know that there are lots of communities where, whether it's doctors that are running private practices, business people, once they've been able to forge those relationships, you can go and consult a doctor and only pay them at the end of the month when you've got money. But I guess they also have businesses to run, right? So if every other customer that's coming in is short of 50 cents and a rand, and they say it's okay, how much of a shortfall will they be left with at the end of the day? But I hear the point that you're making, Garth. Spiwe, you're in Midvaal. Good morning.
Good morning, Sissy.
Yes.
Last week I spoke to one of your colleagues, Mr. John, and I was talking about stock theft in Midvaal area. So I was angry and I used the word kill. And then he accused me of using that word on the national radio. And I was very, very angry, Sissy. Reason being, these thugs again came and steal our livestock. More than 100 sheep and goats were stolen last month. So that's why I said, if it happens that we find them, we will kill them. And he said to me, I mustn't use that word kill, you know.
Okay.
And, so,
I must say, I don't know the context of the conversation, Spiwe, that you're referencing, but did you say that that people should be killed on the radio?
Yes, I did, my sister. I want to withdraw those tweets and apologize for using those tweets.
All right.
But the reason why I use that tweet, looks, I'm about to retire. Ne? So livestock for us is our livelihood after retirement. So these guys, when they come to steal our animals, they don't come with smiles, they come with guns. They shoot guns in the air. So we had to run away. Even our guards, we ran away. But now, if it happened that we find them, really, we don't know what we'll do with them. Because we are bleeding blood. I'm telling you, we are angry, my sister. We are angry. So my request is this. I wonder if our government, cabinet, in fact, can talk about this on their agenda and talk about stock theft.
All right. Spiwe, look, I appreciate the fact that you recognize why making those comments on air especially is inappropriate, and the fact that you have withdrawn those comments. It's not the first time that you're calling in to complain about the issue of stock theft. I know how frustrated you have been, because you've also suffered from that criminality, and it has affected your own farming business. So thank you, but for coming on air and for changing that statement and correcting it. Yes, we get frustrated by the things that are happening in our daily lives, but it absolutely then is not a right to especially use provocative or insightful language on air. So I do truly appreciate that from your side, Simpiwe. It's 9:30. We're going to take the latest news headlines. I'm back with your calls on the other side of this.
Good morning. In the headlines, President Cyril Ramaphosa says industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments. Ramaphosa addressed the UN General Assembly last night. He has called the climate crisis a full-blown emergency. Eastern Cape Police have shot dead 4 suspects at Marikana location in Kiskamahoek. It's believed the suspects are part of a kidnapping and extortion syndicate in the area. And Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has made his first address to the annual gathering of world leaders at the UN General Assembly. I'll have details on these and other stories at 10.
Africa Chipembe. As trees and flowers blossom, the nation gets brighter and excited for sporting action. Tune in to SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4 and SABC radio stations. Also available everywhere for everyone, always on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. SABC Sport celebrates the nation's diverse culture and heritage. Happy Heritage Month. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Hi, I'm Andrew, and I was recently diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome. Patients like myself go through a long and strenuous journey to get a stem cell transplant. I am grateful for the support I've received as I wait for the call that my donor has been found. This Sunflower Month, be a lifeline to patients like myself by registering to become a stem cell donor. You can save a life by registering at dkmsafrica.org.
Real savings, real benefits. Here's what real clients say about Outsurance. Here's Amy.
To anyone who has not reached out to Outsurance, what are you doing? Reach out today.
Yusuf, 45 from Tegadal, pays just 700 Rand a month for his 2021 VW Polo.
It just shows that Outsurance is top of the tops when it comes to insurers.
SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
When self-made billionaire Wilton Knight rescues police detective Lieutenant Michael Long after a near-fatal shot to the face, he gives him a new identity and a new name, Michael Knight. Paired with the unique Knight Industries 2000 aka kit, they are brought in during situations where direct action might provide the only feasible solution. Kusazo Shuba and Michael Knight and Kit are ready to rise to the occasion. Channel your best retro with Knight Rider, weekdays at 12 p.m. only on S3. Open up.
Hashtag SAFM Talking Point.
Morning, Cathy. Let us also address tribalism, not racism only, because we'll find people saying that you must never marry a Xhosa man. He is like this and this and that. Or you must never marry a Tswane woman. They are arrogant and cruel. You know? So we must first love each other as black people before accusing whites. Thank you, Cathy.
Good morning, Sis Katie. You're speaking to Concrete. The name is Day Epizana Doubt Mampondui. I would like to talk about GNU. Point number one, I fully support GNU. Point number two, ama results seyabonakala awe GNU. Umkhwana Spy KZN ophethe amapolisa. Hayi, that guy is really working. He is really working. Nangu no Mackenzie ngapa, he is really working as well. So I fully support GNU because abantu akufunekanga kufanele bagadane kahle kahle. Kufanele bagadane lama political parties. Kufanele bagadane. Akekho zontshontsha. No one is going to steal because they are watching each other. So it's working for us on the ground. Thanks a lot, Sis Katie.
Hi, Kathy. Now that you are just talking about the this cultural identity or cultural heritage or something, you know, I'm a Hlobi and Lihlobi. I sometimes take an offense when people say I'm a Xhosa just because of the interrelation on the language, but it's not totally the same, you know. So I don't know if there are other Hlubis who are listening on this platform who also feel the same way, the way I feel, you know. And we as Hlubis, we have been let down by the government. But the last time I checked, there was this bid in court to challenge the land of ours that was taken by the Zulu Nation.
Morning, Kathy, and the listeners. What's happening with the Minister of Justice now? We're waiting. Thank you. It's Rengo from Cape Town.
Hello, Katie. Katie, I'm very concerned about the use of alcohol in this country, Katie. Especially as black people. I know also what people drink, but as we do it too much. Yesterday, Katie, everywhere when I went, there were people that were drinking alcohol or drinking alcohol. Especially, what's worrying me too much was that there were also the young people, the young kids drinking 14 and 13 drinking alcohol. So I'm just thinking, if they're starting to drink at 13 and 14, where did they see it that alcohol, it's cool that you can drink it?
Yeah, thank you for those WhatsApp voice notes raising different issues. The issue of underage drinking in our society, it is, yeah, I think it's one of those that is really at crisis points that needs attention. And if you go back to the conversation that we had trying to unpack and understand the driving factors behind the high rates of teenage pregnancies in this country, it is a mix of issues. And where you have high teenage pregnancy rates, you have high alcohol usage, you have high levels of violence and gender-based violence, and underage drinking is also just one of those issues. So thanks for raising that issue, especially because it's school holidays and lots of kids are at home. But where are the parents? Where are the parents when all of this is happening? To the gentleman who is offended by people that don't know or that don't understand the nuance, it's a journey of learning, right? In South Africa, we have so many different cultures, and we have to be willing to take people on the journey with us and to expose people to what we know and what they may not know, because our history, unfortunately, is not just a homogeneous history. Yes, there's what is taught in schools, but we know that also to a large extent excludes so much of what South Africans also know to be part of their history. So yes, it's okay, you might get annoyed by it, but I hope that more than annoyance, you use it as an opportunity also to educate the people around you, because you could well find that they're none the wiser about the differences or nuances. Crispin, you're out in Durban. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good wishes for your recovery, complete recovery. I follow on from that point. I think when we talk about heritage, two things keep coming up. Very kind of essentialized views of race and ethnicity, like highly oversimplified, that keep getting repeated and repeated and repeated unhelpfully. I always think like when people say, come dressed in your own cultural clothing. So like, are the whites going to come up in like suit and tie? Or like, what are the whites do? Because it's a dominant culture. Because it's the dominant culture, it just isn't visible to people. Of course, white people everyone's got culture. But actually, to celebrate the culture, what aspects, you have to really think it through. And that's why you don't see very much white participation in terms of wearing our traditional culture. For like somebody like myself from a partially English background, Morris dancing, I mean, it's culturally totally alien to me, completely. So I think one should keep problematizing it. But the other thing, of course, is then the fallen heroes of the struggle against apartheid and colonialism. That's also seen as heritage. But in what way does our heritage pick up on the experiences of, say, like white men, perhaps younger than myself, who went and fought on the border, who perpetrated violence, who in some ways were the victims of violence, and partly at the hands of the apartheid regime itself? We never hear about that. But that's part of our heritage. That's part of our history. Or what about in this part of the world, KwaZulu-Natal, the terrible conflicts that maimed families across the province and did lasting damage to this day? That is part of our heritage, and we're getting things wrong if we don't recognize that these often unhappy things are part of our heritage, as well as the parts that are more positive related to those conflicts as well.
Crispin, what you're saying forces us to do is that it forces us to deal with the fact that the fracturing within our social fabric has taken place across the board. So even when I'm looking at myself as an individual and trying to think about my own identity and crafting whatever that identity might be, the person next to me is probably equally dealing with the same thing. Yes, we may not have been affected in the same way by apartheid, but it did break the social fiber of communities, of families, and of that cultural expression. And to find a way of bringing it back, I think, is what we're grappling with in 2024, because we probably don't even know in some instances what it needs to look like. Because if you're thinking, well, yeah, 100 years ago, this is what used to happen. how are you going to bring back 100 years ago today? How do you let it find meaning today?
Yeah, so I could think, just take that thing of these white men on the border. Why don't they talk about it? I think it's a really important question. Is it because, people are ashamed to be associated with the apartheid regime, which is a reasonable attitude to take, I guess. But it did happen. And those people then end up isolated and angry. I mean, we see a lot of it around, I think, still from this generation, But my work is at the moment very much around facilitating discussions around difficult issues, often violent issues. And the one thing I keep remembering when I'm working with people, I'm constantly being reminded, is that we really do not know other people. And we think we know on the basis of these crude stereotypes. We do not know other people. We don't know their histories. And we may think we come from the same history. We don't. Like, we need to hear what happened in the lives of people. And when you really hear, I mean, sometimes you're just struck by, I would never have understood that. I never knew that. I could never understand this person fully or more fully until I'd heard more of what she was telling me about her life and about where she'd come from and what that heritage actually means for her.
Oh, Crispin, you've put it so well. Thank you. Thank you for that call and the need for us to take time to listen, because our histories are so different. They are so varied. They are so intertwined and are absolutely not linear in the way that perhaps we are told they are by our history books that we get to read in schools. And maybe that can help us to even get to grips with some of the divisions in our society, right? That we create room for that nuance. We create room for perhaps the story that we don't expect or anticipate it to be. Dumisani, you're calling us from Germiston. Good morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm well, Dumisani.
No, I want to talk about the heritage. I mean, I do understand that when we change the names of these holidays, we are trying to accommodate other races. Can you still hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
I can. Yes, I can,
Yeah,
Dumisani.
we were trying to accommodate other races. We were trying to take them along with us. And then, for example, by so doing, we were distorting our history. We were misleading the youth, the upcoming youth. For example, let's talk about June 16. It was called Soweto Uprising. Then it changed to Youth Day, and then the Sharpeville, it changed to Human Rights Day. Shaga's Day, it changed to Heritage Day, and then December 16 and Dingal's Day changed to Reconciliation Day. Look, by so doing, we are distorting our history. We are trying to rewrite the history. I blame, we compromise a lot. I mean, when we took over from 1994, especially we blacks. I mean, we can take other races along without disturbing our culture, without distorting our culture, without disturbing our heritage. And then I blame the custodian of these days, that is the Reconciliation Day and Heritage Day, that is the Kingdom of KwaZulu. The Kingdom of KwaZulu should be the one who protect, perceive and promote and educate, inform the public about this day each and every day when this day comes. Instead of talking politics in their speeches, they must educate the youth about these days.
Do you think that as a country we choose the easy way out because the alternative is that we must deal with the complexity of who we are as a nation? So do you think that it's perhaps we find it easier to maybe sanitize things and say, oh yes, it's Youth Day versus having to deal with the full
Soweto
impact
uprising,
of the Soweto uprising?
Uprising, yeah. No, I think I'm sorry to say the ANC compromised a lot, especially on our side of the plate. I mean, we were trying to. We are the one who tried so hard to accommodate other races, but they are on their side. They never apologize. They never apologize about the apartheid. But we were the one who forced ourselves to them. That's why now we even compromise our heritage just to accommodate them. By saying that we have a heritage day or on a Shaga's day, I mean, the youth doesn't know anything about Shaga, but that day now is used for pride, whatever. Instead of educating people, where does this day come? Where does this day come from? Okay, yeah. So we compromise a lot. I mean,
okay,
sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Dumisani, thank you for that call and for that view, and you're absolutely right in terms of passing the knowledge on to coming generations. What is the work that we are doing to make sure that future generations of South Africans are aware of the full complexity of this history? And Dumisani is right. When it comes to Heritage Day, yes, its origins were Shaka Day, but today very few South Africans talk about it in that context, right? And what does that do for the story that we're telling ourselves as a country? I'm still taking your calls on the open line. 086 000 2032 is the number to dial. 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, I'll take your WhatsApp voice notes on 0614 104 107. And I'm inclined to agree with Dumisani on the sanitization or taking the easy way out when it comes to how we choose to also memorialize part of our history. That sometimes, because we're such a melting pot, maybe it's just easier to go for the low-hanging fruit. Mac, you're in Johannesburg. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy.
Yes.
Cathy, I want to talk about the history of this country. Millions and millions of people of this country, they don't understand the history of this country. Cathy, many people say, when always I listen to SAFM, I hear people say, Chaka, he passed away 1828. That's not the truth. Cathy, Europeans arrived in South Africa 1652. When Europeans arrived in South Africa 1652, Chaka was dead long ago. Chaka, he never saw Europeans when they arrived in this country 1652. So I don't understand where people get this thing that Chaka passed away 1828. It's false. Okay, are you with me?
I'm listening to you, Mac. I'm listening and trying to make notes because I don't have the history off the top of my head. So I have to try and understand the point that you're making while also reconciling myself with what I may know.
Because 1652 to 1828, it's about 166 years back. You see, Europeans arrived in this country 1652. They arrived by 3 ships from Netherlands. Now, 1652 to 1828. How many is that? It's about 166 years They say Chaka passed away 1828. No, Chaka, 1652. Chaka, he never saw Europeans when they arrived in this country. He was already dead 1652. Now, people are misleading people with the wrong history of this country when they say Chaka passed away 1828.
Yeah. Look, I think for that one, Mag, you're going to have to argue with quite a number of historians. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person to have that debate with you, but it largely goes against, including what South Africa has recorded as the date on which Shaka Zulu passed away. And yes, it's very much about who writes the history, but yeah. That's not a debate, Mac, that I believe you and I can have. You should have called in on Monday when we had one of our authors, Ntebe Molope. He would have been a great person to have this debate with.
I wanted to call in, but I couldn't. That day when he was, even him himself, when he said, I was going to ask him about Kim Zilakazi. He was speaking about, because he says, I wanted to ask him, the then king is talking about King Zilakazi. King Zilakazi, he was a king of which tribe?
Okay.
Because you are a king with a tribe. So King Zilakazi was a king of which tribe?
Okay, all right, Mac. We're going to have to leave it there. But like I said, next time use up the opportunity when the historians are in studio so that you can ask them all of these difficult questions. Yeah, I'm definitely not the one that you're going to have that debate with. I have not studied history to the extent that I can speak confidently around it and say, well, what we know, though, is that it's largely accepted that Shaka Zulu died in 1828, as you said there. Steve, you're out in eThekwini. Good morning. All right, it looks like we've lost Steve on the line there. Apologies for that. We'll take a couple of your WhatsApp voice notes.
Good morning, Cathy. This is Anonymous here in the Eastern Cape, in East London. Cathy, quickly, man, I'd just like to bring to your attention the issue of extortion in the Eastern Cape, especially in Mthatha. Cathy, the issue, I think it lies with the management of CPS in the Eastern Cape, because they are not having any strategies to curb the scourge of the extortion in the Eastern Cape. Because what they are actually doing is to tell us that there is no money to deploy all the members. As a result, some of us are sent back to the units, some of us are taking leaves. So basically, it is not true. They're just making a media statement and lying to the people of South Africa. Thank you. Bye. Please look into that. Bye.
Good morning, Cathy. This is Makwarela Chinyazo from Thoyando. You know, Cathy, yesterday I was listening to the president making the speech at the UN. Yes, I was very impressed with what he said, especially when he said that the UN Security Councils need an agent reform. I echo with him on that statement. You know, the UN needs to get reformed and be inclusive of all the continents, you know, especially the African continents. You know, it has been for many years that Africa has been widely ignored or regarded as a dark continent. But African can also play a part in bringing peace across the world. We have seen how the African delegation went to Ukraine and Russia to negotiate peace.
Absolutely, yeah. What an important week it has been at the UN General Assembly. And of course, we've seen President Cyril Ramaphosa leading the South African delegation there. So you're right on that one, on the reforms of the UN. Of course, South Africa also making it clear internationally that it has not changed its stance when it comes to the ongoing war taking place in the Middle East between Israel and Palestinians. Sfiso, you're in Pietermaritzburg. Good morning.
Morning.
Yes,
Morning, how are you?
Sfiso. Yes, I'm well, thank you.
Yes, I want to say something against what the guy who was saying Shaka did not die in 1828. What he was saying is not true. Hello?
Sfiso,
Hello, do you hear
you're
me?
live on the radio. We can hear you.
Okay. Yes, what he was saying is not true, especially about the date. He mentioned 1652. It actually took the white people quite a very long time to reach the inland. Now, what is true is that Shaka did not have or fight battles against white people, but there is well-documented history about him having seen them. And then here in KwaZulu-Natal, we have got places that King named after he had spotted the white people. The first one is Kwakangela Mankengane, meaning that he saw some alien people and he named that place Kwakangela. And then there's also quite a lot of things that are well documented that Shaka would have done in order to make people aware that there's people that he doesn't understand in his place. But he never fought battle with them. So what he says is quite true that he must consult with the historians and then they would tell him and he must read extensively what happened. Thank
Sfiso,
you.
Thanks
Yes.
for that call. Sfiso out in Pietermaritzburg. Yeah, that's the thing about history, right? Sometimes once you start unpacking, it does tend to take us down a rabbit hole of sorts because history is so contested at times. It's not linear, but I do think that there are general facts that we can all try and agree on. And on the issue of the assassination of Shaka Zulu, I think that one is pretty much, there's consensus around when he would have died. It's time for your latest news headlines.
In our top stories, Ramaphosa calls climate crisis a full-blown emergency and high number of unclaimed bodies attributed to delays in DNA testing. Good morning. President Cyril Ramaphosa says industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments. Ramaphosa addressed the UN General Assembly last night. He has called the climate crisis a full-blown emergency. President Ramaphosa says developing economies and African countries in particular bear the brunt of the impacts of a warming planet.
The industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments, and we repeat the call for predictable and sustainable financing for climate action. We must operationalize the agreed upon climate financing and capacity building instruments to advance mitigation and adaptation. Pursuing sustainable development necessitates that those with greater means should support those who lack them. The world faces annual financing gap of some $4 trillion to achieve sustainable development.
Eastern Cape Police have shot dead 4 suspects at Marikana location in Kiskamahoek. One of the suspects sustained injuries and was rushed to hospital. Police spokesperson Sipokazi Mawisa says it's believed the suspects are part of a kidnapping and extortion syndicate in the area. The farm owner accused of kidnapping, assault and the murder of 2 suspected livestock thieves in Middelburg, Mpumalanga, is expected to formally apply for bail at the local court. The farmer and 3 of his employees were arrested a few days after police found remains believed to be of the 2 men on the R575 road in Middelburg. Mutsibi wa Munareng reports.
The suspects allegedly killed 2 men accused of stealing livestock from the farm. Police later found remains of people burnt beyond recognition on the R575 road. The remains are suspected to be those of the victims, but only forensic tests can confirm or discount these. Last week, the case had to be postponed for the court to secure a Chichewa language interpreter, as one of the suspects is a Malawian national.
Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Health has attributed the high number of unclaimed and unidentified bodies in state mortuaries in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape to delays in DNA testing. The committee, which was in Durban, heard that since last month, about 3,186 bodies have not been claimed in KwaZulu-Natal and 526 in the Eastern Cape. The committee's chairperson, Dr. Sibongiseni Hlomo.
Delays in some of the laboratories for DNA testing, fingerprint testing, but there's probably a number of other citizens of the world who are in the country undocumented, and therefore if they actually pass on, there will be no record that we do keep actually of their fingerprints in any part of there. So that is another big backlog. But we think there could be another additional point for KwaZulu-Natal in particular with the looting and the floods of 2021, where some of the people are either reluctant to come forward to indicate that this is a relative of mine.
Britain's Prince William will be travelling to South Africa for the Earthshot Awards. This year's finalists were selected from nearly 2,500 nominees from 75 countries. Kylie Kumalo reports.
Prince William's visit will further cement the cultural relations between South Africa and the United Kingdom. The Earthshot Prize is a global environmental award that is given to 5 winners each year for their contributions towards environmental protection. Each winner receives a grant of 23 million rand to continue their environmental work. The 5 categories were inspired by the UN Sustainable Development Goals: their restoration and protection of nature, air cleanliness, ocean revival, waste-free living, and climate action.
And finally, Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, has made his first address to the annual gathering of world leaders at the UN General Assembly. He used his speech to accuse Israel of fanning the flames of war in the Middle East.
We condemn Israeli crimes against humanity. It is imperative that the international community should immediately stop the violence and bring about a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and bring an end to the desperate barbarism of Israel in Lebanon before it engulfs the region and the world.
Recapping the top story, President Cyril Ramaphosa says industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments. Ramaphosa addressed the UN General Assembly last night. For SAFM News, I am Anne Musa.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide.
The Blues want to ensure they control the 90 minutes in their own backyard to grab maximum points.
Oh, somehow he's got there, and he's poked it in! Super sub, Christopher Nkunku.
Meanwhile, the Seagulls want to be remembered for causing an upset at Stamford Bridge.
Oh, he digs it across, should be the match-winning moment. Pedro! Brighton have won it out in time.
This is the Premier League. Catch the spectacular encounter between Chelsea FC and Brighton and Hove Albion FC on Saturday, 28 September at 3:30 p.m. live on SABC3. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
So why should I use We Buy Cars if I want to sell my vehicle?
Because We Buy Cars buys cars.
But will I get the right price?
Of course. We Buy Cars buys thousands of vehicles and knows exactly what every vehicle is worth. Their buyers deliver exceptional service and pay you immediately.
And how do I know what they'll pay for my vehicle?
It's easy. Visit webuycars.co.za or use the We Buy Cars app. Follow the simple steps and voila, you'll know your car's value in no time. We Buy Cars. Quick, easy, the best.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
8 after 10 o'clock, welcome to the second hour of the Talking Point. Coming up in this hour for Citizens Corner, we're going to be looking at the issue of social housing and why it is that we still have such a big challenge when it comes to social housing in this country. The big issue is really around access, right? That you have millions of South Africans that are unable to access adequate housing close enough to where they work, so that they're able to still be financially active or be economically active rather, and have a roof over their heads. So we'll be taking a look at that conversation within the coming hour. Before we get to it, your WhatsApp voice notes.
Hi, Cathy. I think Dumisani was saying that the Shaka Day and Gingan's Day has been changed. And it looks like all the black people are Zulus. That's not true. So we have so many days because some people will have Mampuru's Day, Sikukuri's Day, and everything. I think this whole day are all encompassed. They want to include all the people, including the Zulus, because it looks like the speaker there is saying that the Zulu is a dominant ethnic group, and everybody else must celebrate the Zulu culture. No, it can't be like that. We're multicultural, multi-ethnicity in South Africa. So this is to accommodate all of us.
Good morning, Cathy. In my own understanding, just to clarify some of the SFM listeners that were calling in with respect to our Heritage Day, my genuine understanding is the reason why it moved from being King Shaka Day to Heritage Day was for the purpose of accommodating all the cultures within our country. And by so saying, it should not have been centered only around King Shaka, right? So by accommodating everybody as an African, as a South African, as a rainbow nation, we would now, label it as a Heritage Day. That's just my own understanding of it. But and that's actually the genuine way I try and explain to the kids, and they understand it, and it's fully understandable. It's some people that don't really understand it, and they don't know how to explain it to their own kids. So yeah, that's my opinion. Daniel here in Bryanston.
Cathy, I wish Cyril Ramaphosa can have that same confidence and same willingness that he has speaking at these big meetings internationally, to have that at home as well. He never addresses the country. He never shows, the need for him to sort of be a comfort to the citizens with so much happening in this country, so much crime. He never comes out to speak on any of those matters. So I'm not impressed by Ramaphosa at all. That he's a capital.
Good morning, Cathy. Hey, Cathy, sometimes we do feel your pain. Hey, what Mac is talking is absolute nonsense. There is a clear lineage of the Zulu kings. If he needs to have his facts, let him go and get education on these things. There's a clear lineage of King Shaka Senzangakhona and who followed after Shaka, and all the way down to King Misuzulu. We cannot be entertaining people who just have airtime and they come here and they waste our time. We know our history, and the Zulu history is clearly documented, and there are facts. So people who call here waste our time now.
All right. Thanks for those WhatsApp voice notes that you've sent through on the show. Okay, let's get then into our conversation for this hour, addressing the issue of social housing. Let me welcome onto the show Professor Ivan Turok, Distinguished Research Fellow in the Equitable Education and Economies Research Division at the Human Sciences Research Council. Professor Turok, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy. Pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
Thapelo Mohapi is with Abahlali Basem John Dolo. Thapelo, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to the viewers.
And Disha Govender is head of the Funukwazi Law Center. Disha, good morning.
Morning, Cathy, and morning to your listeners.
Maybe a good place for us to begin will be just with setting a context for where we find ourselves as a country in as far as social housing is concerned, and why we have this big gap when it comes to creating access for housing, especially for your low and middle income households in the country. Prof. Turok, let me begin with you.
Thanks, Cathy. So it's quite a long story, but to cut it short, we have serious economic problems which hinder people's ability to pay for market-related housing on the one hand, and on the other hand, we've got an urbanizing population which adds to the scale of the problem, and we don't have sufficient supply. That's the third leg of the problem. Our private sector is not providing housing that's affordable to low-income groups, and the state budgets for housing have been progressively cut back, and indeed the major RDP BNG housing program is now confined to marginal groups, to veterans, to people with physical disabilities, and such small people who can't find a way of coping themselves, basically. So we've got lack of demand, people can't afford, and insufficient supply is the key, the crux of the problem.
Lack of demand from an affordability perspective, Prof. Turok, but certainly not from a perspective of the need for social housing, right?
That's right. Demand is about the effective demand. People's ability to pay for housing is constrained because there's high unemployment and wages are low.
Thapelo, your own reflections on this problem that we find ourselves in?
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, if we are not going to address the issue of accessing land for the poor and marginalized in the cities, and of course acknowledging that there is a historic dispossession, and of course the apartheid special planning that has been still exist in our country. If we have a conversation around that and acknowledge that the land in the cities has become way too expensive for ordinary poor people, particularly those who were previously disadvantaged, and the cities continues to be not friendly poor and driving the poor away from the cities. And of course, there is the political will or the lack of from the government to redress the injustices of the past where black people were not allowed in the city. And that special planning still exists today. The townships that were belonging to colored, according to the apartheid regime, and Indian and black are still existing. People from Khayelitsha still have to drive, have to take transport 30 kilometers away from the cities. And the city is still apartheid, especially if you look at it up until today.
Disha?
I feel like my colleagues have covered the field in relation to the response, but maybe just to add and build on what Thapelo in particular said, which is to say that, there's a failure to adequately focus on urban land redistribution, which is absolutely necessary given the systemic and structural causes of the inequality in access to land and housing that we see today. And so that does kind of touch on what Thapelo was saying in relation to acknowledging our history and where we come from and why it is that we see ourselves in the position that we see ourselves today, and what particular intentional intervention and specifically state intervention that is required in order to address the issue.
Professor Turok, I want us to look at this issue of affordability and the ability or even the willingness of people to pay for this housing. What we have seen in a place like the city of Johannesburg with some of the recent fires that we've had is that in many of those buildings, you have families that are paying some kind of rent to landlords that have sometimes hijacked these buildings. And so it's not always a case that people don't want to pay or that they cannot afford to pay at all. It's, of course, about how much they need to pay in order to make this housing accessible for them. Where must the government be coming in to accommodate some of these families? Of course, we're looking at an entry-level home being around 300,000 rand in this country, which is quite a lot of credit that many people are just simply unable to access.
Absolutely. And in fact, 300,000 in many of our cities wouldn't actually buy you anything significant. So it's 500,000 or 600,000 is actually the price of a market rate house delivered by a private developer, right? But usually it'll be a flat rather than a house, but that's what you need to pay. And so there's this huge divide between the formal private market and the informal housing sector, right? Including occupied buildings, including informal settlements, including backyard rooms. These are three of the variations on the informal sector where most people are paying something. As you say, it may be 1,000 or 2,000 rand a month compared with 6,000 or 7,000 rand if they're renting in the private sector. So there's a huge gulf, and there are a range of things government can or should be doing to try and break down this barrier and to improve access to adequate and affordable housing. One is so if we talk about the private market, the formal sector, government needs to deregulate some of the cumbersome red tape that adds to the cost of private housing. It needs to engage more actively with the banks to encourage deeper lending, deeper down the market. It needs to speed up its bureaucratic procedures for planning approval and building approval, again, to reduce the cost to the private sector. It can also provide surplus public land to private developers in good locations at a better price than they would have to pay on the market. Land shortage, as the other two speakers have mentioned, is a big constraint across the board to all kinds of development. So there are things that government should be doing about the formal private sector, and there's a lot it should be doing to improve the quality of accommodation in the informal sector, including addressing the issue of derelict buildings that you've mentioned, including upgrading informal settlements with these basic services, including providing, again, surplus public land for new accommodation in good locations, for people to build themselves. People have shown an appetite and a willingness to build their own homes if government can't afford to provide housing for them. But government needs to enable, and I think that's the key point. Government needs to shift from a regulation mode of practice to say, we're the boss, we're in charge, we will dictate what happens, to an enabling, helping, supporting people and small developers and all other actors in this space to do a better job. Government has very many roles to play in this respect.
Disha, in many respects, it also requires us to rethink how our urban landscapes are currently structured, because, of course, you have sort of your cities, and then you'll have your townships and your informal settlements on the outskirts of that. When it comes to social housing, it really is intentionality around making sure that you do have low-cost households and infrastructure that is available in areas sometimes that would be the preserve of the elite. How do we change our thinking as a country around that? Because, you know, in South Africa today, most people, when they buy property, they also look around and say, well, is there an informal settlement here? Is there likely to be one? I don't want my property prices to be dropping. I don't want my investment to be going down.
So Cathy, let me just start by saying that, you know, social housing as an instrument is meant to specifically target target desegregation of spaces, not just only if the need. It's not just providing housing, but it's also about that redress element that we've spoken about earlier, that social housing is meant to also address. It's a tool that the state can use. And so, you know, it is really important that this tool, this mechanism of social housing actually be used in the spaces required. And a lot of people do tend to fear. There is that fear that, oh no, what we call the NIMBYism, not in my backyard. Underlying NIMBYism is this fear of how it will impact me. However, I think that there's a lot of misinformation, miseducation out there, because if you do look at areas and spaces where social housing has been provided, there hasn't been a negative impact on the property prices of properties surrounding that social housing. If anything, it actually ensures that there's a productive use of land. And so I think we do need to dispel this notion that social housing or having people who earn lower incomes living in our spaces or living in spaces that are reserved for the elite is something that is negative. It actually goes beyond just the issue of housing, but also speaks to the broader issue of social cohesion in our constitutional democracy. And then perhaps to lastly say that to tackle this NIMBYism really requires state assistance in recognizing that sometimes you do need to ruffle some feathers. Sometimes it is justified to actually limit certain rights in order to provide what is necessary under the constitutional dispensation. And so I think those are some of the key things that one needs to consider when looking at the provision of social housing.
Ruffle some feathers is certainly something that I can see the politicians trying to run away from more than, trying to do, especially given the kind of contestation that we have within our political landscape currently. But perhaps, Thapelo, if you're to think of the low-hanging fruit, so where can government be looking at doing this, whether it is the redistribution of urban land? Do you think there's low-hanging fruit that won't necessarily cause the kind of disturbances that Disha is alluding to, that we know the politicians would want to avoid, because they that's what they do. They avoid things that are controversial or would likely cost them votes?
Yes, Cathy, on Monday the 16th, here in Balito, in Gwaduza municipality, in Stenga, we had a march of about more than 4,000 people that we wanted to take the march to the so-called Ratepayers Association, the NIMBY, the Not in My Backyard attitude. Because it is unfortunate that the black and working class are the ones who build the cities to be beautiful, but these cities are priced out of the markets for them to actually even be able to afford. And of course, the some of the issues that the Ratepayers Association with the municipality in Gwaduza, in fact, these people who are business people, who are elite, are actually paying the municipalities legal fees to actually evict the very same people who are living in the informal settlement. And theirs is to say tourists are not coming into South Africa because of these shacks. Tourists are no longer coming into Balito because people do not have services and they have to relieve themselves in the bush. And I think it's very, this is un-South African, if I may put it that way, where you think that a certain group of people, because of their socio-economic status, are not allowed to live in the city that they build as South African citizens. It is unfortunate that that is happening. And we are seeing that that drive of such where municipalities are actually working with the elites who actually wants to drive black people away from the cities. And I think that needs to be addressed because the land in particular that we are marching about belong to the municipality. But the rich people are saying we don't want any kind of development that is going to take place. How do you want people who build the cities, who work in the city, to travel 2 times in order for them to get to the place where they are? And I think there needs to be a discussion around that, and we need to confront that. And on Monday, the 16th of September, we were sending that message that the municipality must confront these elites and say that these people are South Africans and have every right that is enshrined in our constitution to live in the city.
Sure. You know, Thapelo, the issue that you're raising is really spot on because it in many ways reflects how the thinking of, in particular, the middle class in this country has become. But when we continue, I wonder if there are lessons that we can draw from other countries. How have they dealt with issues around social housing, and what is it that perhaps we can also be looking to in terms of trying to foster our own solutions to this challenge? We'll continue with this conversation on the other side of the news headlines.
Good morning. In the headlines, Eskom's multi-year price hike application has officially been published by the National Energy Regulator of South Africa. The tariff increases for direct customers, including municipalities, by around 36% next year. The remains of some liberation fighters who passed away in Zimbabwe and Zambia will arrive at Waterkloof Air Force Base today. And President Cyril Ramaphosa says industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments. Ramaphosa addressed the UN General Assembly last night. Details on these and other stories at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 17 rand 22 to the dollar, 23 rand 04 to the pound, and 19 rand 26 to the euro. Markets in Asia ended today's trading session mainly on a positive note. The JSE has extended gains in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are higher this hour. Gold is trading at $2,655. Platinum $981 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $74.95 a barrel.
There will be humongous fighting spirit accompanied by high emotions, tension, and drama. Because this is a meeting of giants. Golden Black targets maximum points as part of the Heritage Month celebrations. But Cabo Yellow says the Yellow Nation only gets impressed by victory. This is the Betway Premiership. Witness the massive clash between Kaizer Chiefs and Mamelodi Sundowns on Saturday, 28 September at 2:30 p.m. Live on SABC 1 and SABC radio stations. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
Think bigger than just a banking partner. Think a team of specialized experts supporting you to make better financial decisions to enable your growth aspirations. Think a strategic partnership providing indispensable advice to help you make the right moves. Think bigger. Think Nedbank Commercial Banking. For more information, visit nedbank.co.za. See money differently. Nedbank. We're a licensed FSP and registered credit provider.
Kickstart your journey to success in 2025 with the Durban University of Technology. DUT offers programs in the faculties of Accounting and Informatics, Applied Sciences, Arts and Design, Engineering and the Built Environment, Health Sciences and Management Sciences, open for applications for 2025. Applications close on 30th September 2024, but dates may vary. Visit dut.ac.za for a full list of available programs and entry requirements. Apply now through the Central Applications Office by visiting cao.ac.za.
The world's best football league makes its return to S3. Will Arsenal finally win their first title since 2004? Or will Man City continue their dominance of the league and win their 7th title under Pep Guardiola? Will the Dutchmen in Erik ten Hag and Arne Slot have something to say as Man United and Liverpool step in to contest for the title? But it's not only about winning the title. For some of the 20 teams, it's a chance to improve on their performances from last season. While for others, it's the battle to avoid relegation and stay in the top flight. Every team has a point to prove. This is not just football. This is a masterpiece being played out every weekend. Channel your best sport with the English Premier League. Saturdays at 3 p.m. on S3. Open up. S3.
Tune in to catch the rebirth of Muvango's new season on SABC2 every Monday to Friday at 9 p.m. and experience the drama and excitement with new intriguing characters and, of course, your usual favorites, Azwidini, Rendani, Teboho, and, of course, Khosi. It's a renaissance of new beginnings, love, secrets, and betrayal. Remember, that's every Monday to Friday, 9 p.m. on SABC2.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, we continue the conversation on The Talking Point. We're focusing for Citizens Corner today on the issue of social housing and how we as a country can continue or can begin really to make a dent when it comes to providing affordable and accessible housing for millions of South Africans who need it. Our guest this morning, Professor Ivan Turok, who is Distinguished Research Fellow with the Human Sciences Research Council, Thapelo Mohapi, Abahlali Basemjondolo, and Disha Govender, who's the head of Ndifuno Kwazi Law Center. Prof, I want to come back to you and look at what other countries have done. How have they dealt with the issues of the elitism that takes place within society? And you heard what Thapelo was saying about how he believes that sometimes the government and municipalities are colluding with elites to keep low-income housing out of certain areas. How have other countries dealt with that?
Right. Well, this is a global problem, of course, Cathy, because inequality has been rising, economies have been stagnating. So it's not as if there's a magic wand, right? But let me give you 3 examples. The first one from Europe. And the number one way of dealing with it in European cities is through social housing. Because social housing is well managed, the quality of the stock is guaranteed, the rent is controlled, tenants pay rent, and so they are law-abiding and decent citizens, if you like, to dress it up that way. So it's perfectly acceptable. If political leaders commit to funding social housing, it is the most effective instrument for integrating cities, because it's on a scale that makes a big dent in the problem, and it's just as good as housing on the private market. So that's the way European cities do it, by commitment to fund good social housing. In America, in more of a private sector society, the approach is to put conditions on private developers, so that if you get permission to build 1,000 units, 20% of them, say, have to be affordable, so that the private developer is given the responsibility for providing decent, affordable housing. And that works. Most American cities have this, it's called inclusionary housing policy, or inclusionary zoning, Most American cities have a policy like this in place, specifically to overcome segregation, and it works. So we also need to do that. Johannesburg recently introduced a scheme, but it's the only one in the country. The third example is helping micro developers in middle-income countries where they don't have the resources maybe of Europe or the United States. You support smaller developers who can build a more affordable stock. And this is what the third approach is, to enable people who can build more cheaply to provide housing of a different quality. It might be small flats, it might be backyard rooms, it might be, as I said, a range of different types of rental accommodation. We're seeing this happen organically in South African cities. Many of these developments are well located in relation to transport nodes, but municipalities have been sort of slow to recognize and respect this phenomenon that's happening of small-scale rental housing.
So that means that, Prof, the pushback that we're seeing in South Africa is not only unique to us, that other parts of the world where programs of this nature have been pursued, there has also been pushback.
There has, but actually, interestingly, in many countries, there's been a counter-insurgency to NIMBYism, with movements springing up saying we support YIMBYs, right? Yes, in my backyard, to recognize that we want to live in an integrated society and that people have a right to live in decent conditions, and that the wealthy in our affluent groups in our society should pay something towards the housing of poorer people who are less fortunate than themselves.
Disha, the wealth having to pick up and subsidize the poor, let's talk about that in the context of South Africa again, where you have, I think, quite a prevailing sort of thinking that says, well, I'm working hard just to be able to get access to a particular area. I can barely afford to stay there. How am I going to be able to subsidize somebody else to stay there as well?
Cathy, I think once again this has to be rooted very much in the historical context of South Africa, and recognizing that it's going to take the efforts of everyone to kind of undo the inequality that we see in our cities in particular, because the inequality was manufactured. And so there's something about, educating our people around recognizing the social value of land, and importantly recognizing that we have collective responsibility in changing the circumstances of us all. This capitalist rhetoric that we are forced into as a result of capitalist systems, which kind of keep people focused on their own survival, needs to be broken. We need to really, go back to the basics and the principles of what we say is Ubuntu, and recognize that the fear that if I share, or the fear that I won't be able to survive if I, also contribute. We have to start really unpacking where that actually comes from. And I'm not saying that those aren't valid concerns that people would have, but this is where, for instance, again, nurturing and understanding of how things can actually work if everybody does contribute becomes important, because you do have systems in place here, growingly so, as well as elsewhere, where people recognize that actually when we pool resources, human and otherwise, a lot of things do become more possible. So it is about that sort of cultural shift and mental shift that needs to happen. And, Prof mentioned earlier this movement of YIMBYism that you're seeing elsewhere. In the city of Cape Town, which, where spatial apartheid is quite visually stark, we do hear voices, in Sea Point, where there's a lot of contestation about the specific site that should have been used for affordable housing that was sold, and subsequently that sale overturned. we do see people coming up with sort of this yes in my backyard. There are a group of people who recognize that if we are able to come together, then we can actually ensure that everybody lives a dignified life and has a dignified space to stay. It's not an easy task, but it is something that is achievable. And when you talk about subsidizing the poor, I want to just make one point, which is that we cannot just only value money, as it were, and actually how we value different people's contributions in society needs to also be relooked at. How much is the value of a person who keeps our streets clean? What is the value of that contribution? What is the value of the contributions that our poor working class communities contribute to actually making society what it is? And for too long, these have been undervalued. And so, like I say, it requires people to think differently about the value and importance of various people's work as it is, in order to then reshift and rethink about what we call subsidization of the poor.
Absolutely, Disha.
And government should lead in that. They should be leading in breaking those stereotypes.
And I think we also as a society needing to confront our own classist mentalities, right? Because class is a big struggle from a stereotype point of view that we battle with as a society too. And so it requires us then to also question part of that framework. I want to bring in some of our listeners into this conversation. France, you're calling from Centurion. Good morning.
Cathy, I think most of the problem is the origin of this planning of CBD. I mean, at the rural areas there, I mean, they are not developed. So everybody, for you to use a decent toilet, you must come to the town. You must come to the city. For example, in Kwandebele, this TS Galaxy, they could not use the stadium in Kwandebele because of the development. They had to move somewhere. I mean, this CBD planning did not work. The economy must be spread across the country. I think this is the beginning and this is the cause of all these things. Because for you to get any development, you must come to the town.
And I don't know if that's something that's avoidable, Prof. Maybe you can come in here. How economies play themselves out and the development of what then becomes these economic hubs and economic centers that, of course, draw the numbers of people that spur migration to these areas. Is that unavoidable?
Well, it's a global phenomenon that economies generate advantages, derive significant advantages from concentration and density. But that doesn't mean to say that everybody has to move to the city because services are failing, right? So you want public services to be universally accessible. Schools, health centers, clinic, water, electricity, these should be available across the board. But when it comes to employment, I think it's realistic to recognize that most of the jobs will be in the cities, and that for working age people, their futures, for many of them, will be better off in the cities. And so we have to accept this and accommodate these people in decent conditions, not force them to make sacrifices, to live in informal settlements just to get access to, the labor market. That's unfair, that's unjust, and it's not sustainable in terms of a stable society.
Chapelo?
Yes, first and foremost, I want to agree with the listener. Part of the reason that we move in the cities is because of the economic reasons and, of course, services not adequate provided in the rural areas, and hence we move to the cities. And I think if the government invests more in the rural area, in the rural economy, people would then have no reason. No one wants to come to the city and live in a shack We would really love to live with our families in the rural areas, but because of the economic situation in the country, we are then forced to move in the urban areas. And also, I just want to highlight one of the most successful so far social housing. It's actually mixed used development that is taking place in the same municipality in Guaduza, where we actually forced the municipality to build housing. Those are GNPs, but also social housing for those who can afford. But this has been because the municipality, the implementing agent, which is a contractor, and Abahlali Basemjondolo are constantly engaging each other. And I think if something of that nature, where you have the private business as well as government and, of course, civil society coming together, finding a solution constantly on this issue of the crisis of housing, it will be great. But one thing that I want to highlight, the misuse of the word hijacked building. Hijack means that there are people who are collecting rent from poor people having taken over the building. When poor people move into a building because they are in need of housing and they're desperate of housing, and they are not there is no rent collected, it's only poor people that live there, I don't think we should call that hijacked. It's out of desperation, it's out of people being homeless, have nowhere to go and wanting to be closer to the city. And the situation in Darling Street, in the flats in Cape Town, is no different to that. There is no one collecting rent, it's just poor, desperate people who moved into a building so that they could be closer. And I think the only way to address that is government meaningfully engaging with the people that are in that particular building.
All right. Thanks for that, Tapelo. Speaking of Cape Town, is it Tonderai? Good morning.
Hi, morning, Sis. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I'm good. Sis, I just have an issue with, I think the banks. I should say that. Firstly, I'm a Zimbabwean national, but I'm married to a South African national. We did buy our first property out country, like outside of the city, which is like 70 kilometers from the town, where we can't afford to drive every day from there to our workplace. And then we have been trying to apply for a bond, I think for past 4 years now. And they can't, none of the banks could accept us because they just say your husband is not a South African and he doesn't have a permanent residence. And as you also know, with the situation with the work permits, that the last fiscal permit that I have on my passport expired in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And then till then, we just have those receipts that we applied for the other permits, and then they just extend like it's going to expire this when. And every time when we go to the bank, they'll just say you need to have a permit, which like we have been waiting now for more than 4 years. But that's not my main issue. My main issue is that, okay, we said, okay, my mom has also got a salary. Why can't you evaluate how much can she afford? What can you allocate for her? And then whatever difference, we can try to raise that. And no one is willing to help.
And Tonderai, how would you say that this is affecting you and your family in terms of trying to manage and organize your lives?
So now, at the end of the day, we got a property that we are paying rent for, and then we actually put someone there to rent. And also, we are also renting in the city now, which is like the money that we are paying for that rent, we could be paying our bond for at least for the past 5 years.
Yeah, so in many ways, you feel like it's a bit of a setback, isn't it?
It is actually a setback.
Okay. All right, Tonderai, I'll get our guests to respond to you in a moment. Colin, you're also in Cape Town. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to your panel. You know something, I listened to this housing problem quite many times, different versions, different stories. But you know, what I look at is our population growth. We'll never sort out this housing problems. The migration and so going from one place to another. Instead, the townships aren't even being used, or even not. They're not even building cities. They're not even building infrastructure for those people who are living in townships to find jobs. They're not even. I don't know. I have to say, they're going to solve this problem because the population is outgrowing GDP. And unemployment is getting higher and higher. You go to informal settlement and just ride around and look. You'll see more children than adults. And people are living here for years like that. We'll never sort this problem out unless they start building in the townships, building factories, creating work for those people. It will prevent them from migrating into cities. And the cities in the old end won't have any more space for those people. The government must build up the townships. Infrastructure is what they need. Jobs. Create jobs here. Thank you, Cathy.
All right, Colin, thanks for that contribution. I'm going to give my guests an opportunity to respond to our listeners and also in their put in their concluding remarks. The hour has just gone by so quickly. Maybe Disha, let me begin with you.
Thanks, Cathy. I think the first caller is really speaking to the issue that Ivan raised earlier around our banking and finance system and what is required of those systems in ensuring that people are able to access the funding that they need in order to either buy homes themselves or get the finance to build the homes that they need. And I think that requires us to creatively think about how we place pressure on and use the mechanisms that are available to ensure that big corporations, including banks, come to the party and recognize their responsibility. Because there are things that can be done. You can look at, for instance, lending rates and lending policies and see whether or not they meet the test of constitutionality and see where changes can be made. And then, in respect of the second caller, just simply to say that there are perceptions around population growth being so big and that being a major issue as to why we cannot deal with the problem. And there's a reductionist idea, which is that obviously the first thing you try to do is make a problem smaller. But I think it requires a little bit more of a nuanced thinking when it comes to what is needed in order to address the various issues. It's not a silver bullet for all things. And so, yes, you will require investment in rural communities. You will require development of well-located affordable housing. You will require sort of this re-education of the population in relation to the social value of land. There are multiple things that need to be done if we are going to shift the needle in this housing crisis and this issue that we find ourselves faced with. And so I take the points that have been raised by both the callers and hope that some of this conversation that we've had today will help people think a little bit more clearly around, what is their role, what is our individual role in this fight.
All right, thanks for that, Disha. Prof?
Yes, on the point of banks, I think we do need a public debate about the role of our banks. They have been making unprecedented profits. Nobody has mentioned that in the last few years, right? Despite actually their lending, the statistics show they have been giving fewer mortgages over the last decade. So it doesn't sound right, and it requires unpacking, it requires challenging their risk-averse mindsets, which seem to be unhelpful at the moment. So I really would welcome a public debate on the role of banks in the housing sector. Mm-hmm. On the population issue, I think you cannot control your population like the Chinese have done. That hasn't worked. The Chinese are now unraveling all those controls because it's backfired badly. They now have a shortage of labor in their economy. So we need to think about how we translate our youthful, energetic population into a demographic dividend. How do we maximize the positive possibilities of a youthful population and think creatively about using our young people, employing them productively, and not regarding them as the problem. And
All
that
right.
does require investment in people, investment in places like townships, much more investment in the infrastructure and jobs required to make people productive.
Tapelo, you'll have the last word. Briefly for me, please.
Yes, all I want to say is that in the 12 years that I worked in the informal settlements, I have seen that there are people who can afford social housing, who are not necessarily needing to be part of the GNB and receive free housing from government. And therefore, I think government needs to speed up the social housing, but also we must address the issue of corruption. Now, lately, we have the issue of construction mafia that has been taking place and delaying the very few social housing that are being provided. And therefore, if we can deal with all of these things, I think we are good to go and then probably, be successful in terms of that. I would also love to know the meeting between the Minister Kubai, Minister of Human Settlements, with the banks, because she also publicly complained about the bureaucratic process of the banks when it comes to those who earn between 3,500 and 22,000. I would love to hear what happened to that, what was the outcome of that meeting. But we still say that banks are not friendly to the working class, particularly those who earn in that margin.
All right. Well, thank you so much for those contributions. I certainly think that you've given us a next leg for a follow-up conversation to this issue. Disha, Tapelo, Prof. Tirok, let me thank you all for your time.
When self-made billionaire Wilton Knight rescues police detective Lieutenant Michael Long after a near-fatal shot to the face, he gives him a new identity and a new name, Michael Knight. Paired with the unique Knight Industries 2000 aka kit, they are brought in during situations where direct action might provide the only feasible solution. Kusazo Shuba and Michael Knight and Kit are ready to rise to the occasion. Channel your best retro with Knight Rider, weekdays at 12 p.m. only on S3. Open up.
Ask me how I know that 50% of car claims are pre-approved instantly. That's because I was one of them.
Yeah, they got my car back on the road with the first repair.
I submitted my claim on the ANG app. I didn't even have to call.
Auto & General is proud to be recognised as South Africa's best car insurer by Forbes and The Star for short-term insurance. Isn't it time you switch to award-winning cover? Visit autogen.co.za. Auto & General, never not there. ANG is a licensed non-life insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
Channel Heritage Day your way on Afternoon Express on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. only on S3. As Chef Ruben Riffel braais lekker curried lamb skewers, we rock our traditional regalia, and Jules Harding of Good Luck celebrates her daughter Skylar's first Heritage Day, and it's orange malva pudding for dessert. That's Afternoon Express this Tuesday at 6 p.m. only on S3.
Get affordable car insurance and do more with the money you could save every month. 69-year-old Vivian can afford to treat herself more now that she pays an awesome car insurance premium of only 700 and 49 rand per month to insure her grey 2024 Suzuki Jimny AT5DR. Do you want more? Well, SMS out to 30754 to get a quote. That's out to 30754 now. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
The top stories this hour, more on the police shooting in Keiskamahuk, and Ramaphosa says that climate commitments aren't being implemented. A very good morning to you. Police have recovered unlicensed firearms and suspected stolen assets at the crime scene where 4 suspects were shot dead in Keiskamahuk in the Eastern Cape. Officers were following up on a lead of a person with unlicensed firearms when they were confronted by a hail of bullets in the early hours of today. Police retaliated and 4 suspects were shot dead. The Deputy Provincial Commissioner for Crime Detection, Zitulele Dlala, says they are closely monitoring the area as it seems to be a hideout for criminals.
We recovered 3 pistols, the firearms.
2 vehicles, and a police reflector jacket. We're expecting to arrest other people if information leads us. This is the information that we were following, and it's the second time that we have such confrontation with the criminals and the police come up tops.
Basic Education Minister Siviwe Gwakgobe says the learner population has increased by close to 300,000 learners in the past 5 years. She briefed the media on the impact of the budget cuts on the education sector at a provincial level. This follows the recent Special Council of Education Ministers meeting held to discuss the pressing sectoral matters, including budget cuts. Gwakgobe says the budget cuts have led to an increase in the teacher-learner ratio.
Now, it's important to retain a manageable learn and educator ratio, because that means that we are able to make sure that the quality of outcomes is looked after. Once your ratios are big and your class sizes are bigger, we are unable to guarantee that we will have the same amount of quality of outcomes that we need.
Eskom's multi-year price hike application has officially been published by the energy regulator NERSA. The tariffs increase for direct customers, including municipalities, by around 36% next year, followed by a 12% for the 2026-27 financial year, with the final increase of 9% for 2027-28. If approved, the price hike would allow for the power utility to collect 446 billion rand in revenue in 2026. Eskom's Hasha Totalemaje elaborates.
We do understand that this is a spike, but we have to keep in mind that if the consumer does not pay for the efficient cost of electricity, then the taxpayer needs to pay. And that is the conundrum we find ourselves, for many years, and we continue to do so. This is an application that we will make to NERSA, and then NERSA will make the final decision, because Eskom can only implement what NERSA decides. It does not decide on its own as to what the price increase or price adjustment would be.
The remains of some liberation fighters who passed away in Zimbabwe and Zambia will arrive at the Waterkloof Air Force Base today. These include Advocate Dumanokwe, a former ANC-SG who died in Zambia in 1978, Edward Makoti, the former PAC leader who passed away in Zimbabwe in the 80s, and others. Sports, Arts and Culture Minister Gayton McKenzie and Defence Minister Enje Motshekga will receive the remains. Ditabatso Tetsi has more.
Some families of South Africans who died in exile have expressed their appreciation as the country receives the mortal remains of their loved ones. Former ANC Secretary General Dumanokwe's family says that this is a remarkable moment as he will finally rest at home. Nokwe was one of the instrumental figures during the defiance campaign in the 50s, and he was praised as a fine diplomat of the ANC. He died in Zambia in 1978. Former PAC leader Edwin Letsholo Makoti's family echoes the same sentiments and says this is a momentous occasion. Makoti's remains have been exhumed from Zimbabwe. He was one of the founding members of the PAC and died in 1989. Ditabosotetsi, SABC News.
And President Cyril Ramaphosa says industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments. He addressed the UN General Assembly last night. Ramaphosa has called the climate crisis a full-blown emergency. He says developing economies and African countries in particular bear the brunt of the impacts of a warming planet.
The industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments, and we repeat the call for predictable and sustainable financing for climate action. We must operationalize the agreed upon climate financing and capacity building instruments to advance mitigation and adaptation.
The top story at 11 o'clock, police have recovered unlicensed firearms and suspected stolen assets at the crime scene where 4 suspects were shot dead in Cathy in the Eastern Cape. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Makhalemele.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Seven after 11 o'clock. Welcome to the third and final hour of The Talking Point. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be looking at the African New Year and really then focusing on the significance that it marks, not only for South Africa, but also for the continent. And why is it that we don't actually have the African New Year that is observed as widely as perhaps some would want us to? And again, I do apologize for my voice. I promise I won't be putting you through this anymore. I will take the rest of the week off until I'm fully recovered. Well, the 23rd of September, of course, marks the African New Year. It's referred to as Inzalo Yelanga, which is the world's oldest stone calendar. Mkhulu Nzingiza is going to be speaking to us about this. He's a Kemet historian and also a student at the Credo Motwa African Philosophy, co-founder of the Kemet African Royal Calendar. Mkhulu, good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Guys.
And I apologize again just for the loss of my voice there. But let's talk about the significance of the African New Year. When did it start being documented as a calendar?
It was documented, I think over 20 years ago. After we learned the, information from Ubabu Credo, we then decided that, because that calendar, the oldest stone calendar in the world, it's here in Mpumalanga. It's a place called Inzalo Yelanga, the birthplace, of the sun. So it marks the solstices as well as the equinoxes. So we then, interpreted that and, created a book that we call the Kemet African Royal Calendar, which aligns with the energy of the Southern Hemisphere. Remember that ever since we were colonized, we've been using a colonial calendar, which is based on the Northern Hemisphere, which is why ever since we were colonized, we've been misaligned. So this is an attempt to realign all Africans, to that natural flow of energy of the Southern Hemisphere.
How different is the African calendar to just the calendar that we use that governs our lives, that tells us that today is the 24th, or rather is the 25th of September 2024?
The difference is that, we've been twisted. A calendar that, was imposed on Africa during colonization. Remember that the world is divided into two. There's the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. Those in the Northern Hemisphere have their own calendar. Whilst here on the Southern Hemisphere, we have our own calendar that begins in September, not in January. Because January, I'll make an example, December, according to the African calendar, is called ngesizulu Uzibandlela. Is the month of maturity. Uzibandlela means the grass has grown too much. You can no longer see clearly, those pathways. So it represents maturity. So it's scientifically impossible for the year on the Southern Hemisphere to begin in January. So therefore, what we did was to change the calendar, because it's the same calendar. When the sun is in the Northern Hemisphere, we experience, winter here on the Southern Hemisphere. But, when it's summer here, it's winter that side. So it makes logic that we can't use, their calendar. We have to align to our own calendar, which begins, in September. Remember, on the 21st of September, the sun officially left, the Northern Hemisphere. went through what is called the imaginary line of the equator, which takes 3 days, 21. On the 22nd is the day of the spring equinox, where, the energies of Earth are in balance. Then on the 23rd of September, it makes 1 degree southwards, which signifies a new cycle for the southern hemisphere, when, we will start receiving, the hydrogen that, hibernated with the sun, which is why we then witness a greening of the environment, during this month of Umandulo, September.
So, Mkhulu, if I'm to understand you correctly, what you're saying about the calendar is that it is really to align with the seasons that we go through in this part of the hemisphere on the African continent. What is this? What is the meaning or the significance of that? Why should we care that, on the African calendar, there are these different seasons that are acknowledged, and what would those mean for us?
Firstly, it's a practical tool, to set a good foundation for a decolonization program. It's important for people to be aligned to nature. So our consciousness can never go against the natural flow of the energy of the southern hemisphere, which is why whatever we try to do to correct ourselves, as long as we are still misaligned and going against the natural flow of energy of the southern hemisphere, we will never get anywhere. We have to realign, with nature, because the African, way of life is all centered around nature. So we can never be in opposition of nature. We've got to flow, with that energy.
Practically, what does that look like? Again, because the calendar that we're using is not just a South African calendar, but it's also a calendar that is recognized really globally and aligns affairs globally.
There's nothing wrong with accepting a global calendar, but like any other normal nation, like the Jews and the Muslims, they use the global calendar, but they have their own, and the Chinese celebrate their New Year in their own calendar, according to their own calculation. The Jewish people, they do the same. The Muslim people, they do the same. It's only Africans that don't have their own calendar, and yet Africa is the one that gave the world the calendar. So we don't understand what's wrong with the leadership of the continent, because it's very important for them to determine their own time. Whoever determines your time controls your mind, which is why Africa is like this, because we don't determine, we go against the natural flow of energy of the southern hemisphere.
So then, Mkhulu, take this moment to educate us a bit further about the African calendar and the seasons then that would be accommodated in the African calendar, and how those would flow.
Oh yes, it has 4 seasons. Summer, winter, and their intermediaries, right? So it begins in September, meaning the September marks the first cardinal point, right? Which is September is the month of renewal. Everything is renewed, on Earth, on the southern hemisphere. That's why we're witnessing greening of the environment and budding, of the trees, because there's that energy that renews everything. Then from there, the second month is October, right? October, we calculate like that until we reach August. August is the last month of the African year. It's the 12th month of the African year. Then we begin again, recognizing the equinoxes. what happens in the spring equinox, the sun is returning. Then we move over to the winter solstice, which is June, when the sun and earth are furthest away, from each other. But on the 21st of June, the sun returns, makes a U-turn, and faces the southern hemisphere. Then we go to March the 21st, which now signifies a winter period, because on the 21st of March, the sun officially departs from the southern hemisphere. That's why we do a ceremony then called the Lamentation of Oset, to lament the departure of the sun, which has that natural energy. We are going to remain with dryness. Then on the 23rd of December, which is the summer solstice, the sun is closest, to Earth and pumps enough hydrogen for Earth to sustain itself until that time again. So we follow those 4 cardinal points, which have those 3 months intermediary, seasons.
When you compare the African calendar to other calendars, would you say that there are similarities, especially as you spoke about the Jewish calendar, the Muslim calendar, especially in terms of the essence and the ethos that they carry where seasons are concerned?
Oh yes, and the Muslims, are slightly distant, but they are far away from the northern page calendar. But the people who are much closer to the African calendar is the Jewish calendar. The Chinese is far away because they use a completely different type of, astrology, to calculate, their calendar. But, the importance of a nation using their own calendar, because it then acts as a glue, for that nation's patriotism and unity. Like the Chinese, every year they know wherever they are, and the Jewish people do the same. They can be in New York, but when it's a new year at home in Israel or in China, all Chinese or Jewish people participate. So that strengthens their patriotism and their, unity and love among themselves. But we, the founders and introducers of the calendar, we don't have anything like that. This has always, troubled me about African leaders.
I wonder how you feel about the African calendar and the African New Year that was spurred on the 23rd of September. Is it something that you observe? Is it something that you were even aware of? Let's have the conversation after this break.
Hey, want to check your TV license balance conveniently? Look no further. Our SMS service allows you to do just that. By sending a message containing your ID or TV license number to 44210, you can quickly access your balance without needing multiple inquiries or waiting on hold. Plus, standard SMS rates apply. Take advantage of this efficient method to stay informed and streamline your payment process today. T's and C's apply.
And we went on a water safari, and Mom spotted a hippo, and it said, "Grrr."
There is a place where you can see wonder and the wild, with breathtaking scenery and endless landscapes. Enjoy good food and embrace great taste.
And the next day we went to the reed dance. I saw the maidens handing over reeds to the mighty Zulu king, and the Zulu warriors chanting, "Baye."
Explore all this and more in the magical Zulu Kingdom.
This message is brought to you by KZN Tourism and Film Authority.
The students are summoned for an assignment to establish who will achieve a distinction of 3 points. This is the Hollywood Bet Super League. Who will conquer the varsity derby? Catch the Mzansi Queens of the beautiful game. University of Port Hare Ladies FC versus UJ Ladies FC on Sunday 29 September at 11 a.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
Win your share of 50,000 Rand when you play Winning at Live with One Life. Don't forget to enter on our website, safm.co.za. Stay tuned to the morning brief on SAFM. Keep your phone on loud and we might be the one to change your life. One Life is a licensed life insurer and FSP. T's and C's online. One Life, changing lives.
How can we make healthcare work for everyone? Join the discussion at the 2024 GEMS Symposium on the 26th and 27th September 2024 under the theme Innovate, Integrate, Accelerate, a universal health coverage commitment. This event will bring together experts to shape the future of healthcare and tackle critical challenges such as healthcare access and prevention. Be part of this important conversation. Visit www.gems.gov.za to register and for more details.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We're looking at the African New Year and its significance, and Mkhulu Nsingiza, who is a Kermit historian, a student at the Credo Mutwa African Philosophy, and also co-founder of the Kermit African Royal Calendar, is educating us a bit more about the African calendar and really what has gone into it. And he's explained to us already that according to the African calendar, the month of September is one of renewal. So as the African calendar marks its new year, which was on the 23rd, it means that we're effectively now in a season of renewal. So Mkhulu, if we were to try and align our activities as countries and as people with the African calendar to go with the flow of the energy, as you have said, and not really to go against it, what would you say we need to be doing between the season of September of renewal and in the coming months going into December and January?
I think because we don't need to reinvent, the wheel. We just need to realign the ceremonies that are there, because this is time for national, ancestral, prayers, to give thanks and reverence, to the cosmic bodies that give life on earth, which is the sun and moon. So there are two ceremonies that aligns with this renewal. Is the ceremony of Umhlanga, the reed dance, which happens in Swaziland and here. Here it's very optional because it's only done, or we are exposed to that of the Zulu nation. But it must be a national, ceremony where everybody that is in South Africa, they'll be bound to partake, because this is when we reconnect, with the sun and moon and our ancestors. Remember, when the sun is in hibernation, it means it's in the northern hemisphere, meaning that our ancestors are one with the sun and moon. So the return of the sun on the southern hemisphere is also the return of our ancestors. So we give respect, and thank them, for them to return to assist us, so that we are able to achieve, everything, that we had planned for our lives.
Do you find it hard to get people to actually accept the existence of an African calendar? Do you have to convince people about the work that you're doing, Mkhulu?
No, the only problem and that I see and experience is access to information and knowledge. This is the work of government. Our government is supposed to be in the forefront of reintroducing the oldest calendar, the calendar that was used before colonization. But as soon as people hear about this, they get excited. For once, we hear that as African people, we have a day that we all share, that is common to all of us, because this calendar affects the whole continent. So we've experienced just so much joy that, comes from people upon receiving this type of knowledge. But the only impediment is access to this knowledge, because government should be teaching this in schools. Government should be promoting this, as one of the programs of decolonization of the African mind.
All right, we're going to continue the conversation in a moment. I want to hear from you. How much attention do you pay to the African calendar? I'll take your calls on 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial. 086 000 2032. On the WhatsApp voice note line, 0614 104 107. Do you think it holds particular significance for the continent, or are you unaffected by it? Is it just business as usual? Do you care even about the fact that there is an African calendar? I'll take some of your thoughts shortly. Before we get to your phone calls, let me see. We'll take a couple of WhatsApp voice notes. It'll lead us into the 11:30 headlines.
Good morning, Cathy. It's Clinton here. Cathy, the gentleman that you just spoke to, he said something very profound. He who controls your time controls your mind. Oh, what a profound statement.
Good morning, Sis Kevi. Can you please ask Ubaba, where do we find this old calendar in Mpumalanga? Because I've tried to search for it ever since I knew about it. But it's very difficult to locate it. Thank you.
A very good morning to you with the news headlines. Police have recovered unlicensed fire